Have you ever wondered what it's like to be a schizophrenic at the tender age of 17? Have you ever wondered what French barbecue smells like? Have you ever considered what it's like to have a career change from milking cows to becoming the spiritual leader of the French army in just 1 year? If yes, I've got just the right person for you. It's February 1429. The Dauphin of France realized he's kinda screwed. 14 years ago, the French got completely wrecked at Agincourt by an army led by Timothy Chalamet. 5 years later, the Dauphin's dad, who was like totally crazy and shit, decided to sign a treaty with Timothy Chalamet, which basically disowned the Dauphin and gave the French crown to the English. Oh, and the Burgundians, which used to be allied with France for like forever, is now allied with the English because the Dauphin decided it was a good idea to assassinate the Duke of Burgundy in a peaceful, diplomatic meeting. Thankfully, both his dad and Timothy Chalamet died in 1422, and he was able to become the leader of the Armagnac faction and make a claim for the French throne. Oh, and by the way, the English kings were also technically French as well, because the English nobility were Normans who invaded England a few hundred years ago and took it. So the situation was really complicated. Everybody had some sort of claim to the French throne, but the reality is, whoever wins the war is going to be the king of France. Anyways, the war for France was going really badly. The Anglo-Burgundians were besieging the major city of Orleans, and if that falls, it would open the floodgates to the rest of France. Then comes a peasant girl, who says she's sent by God to save France and shit. The girl's name is Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was born in a small village called Domremy, which is deep within Burgundian territory, but her area was loyal to the French crown. After a raid on her village when she was 13, she started getting hallucinations, which, visions. Visions from God, from Saint Michael, Saint Margaret, and all the other saints. There were rumors circulating in the French countryside at the time that an armed virgin carrying a banner would put an end to France's suffering, and Joan of Arc was like, hey, that's me. In May 1428, Joan went to a nearby town called Vaucouleurs, where she tried to convince the captain of the garrison at the town to take her to see the Dauphin. After several refusals, third time's the charm, and on the third meeting in February 1429, the captain finally agreed and had 6 soldiers escort her to the royal court in Chinon. Oh, and she started wearing men's clothes at the time, and would wear men's clothes for the rest of her life, which was super weird at the time. And off she went to Chinon to meet the most powerful man in France. One of the greatest stories in French history has just begun. Joan met the Dauphin and he was impressed. They did some checkups on her. And by checkups, I mean like a virginity check. And yep, she's a bona fide virgin alright. After these medieval certification tests, she was ready for action. She got her own plate armor and designed her own banner, which she always carried with her into battle. And off she went to Orleans with a relief force. But before she left, she sent a message to the English commanders at Orleans, telling them,
Partez, ou je vous oblige à partir.
Damn. For a 17-year-old girl, she knew how to assert dominance. What a Chad. When she got there, the commander of Orleans took a boat to come pick her up. There was celebration in the city when she arrived. Everyone has heard of a girl sent by God to save France. People needed hope, and Joan gave it to them. Morale in the city went from like -200 to over 9,000. After some reinforcements came into the city, the French took the initiative. In the afternoon of May 4th, the French attacked the English stronghold at Saint Loup, east of the city. 1,500 French attackers descended on the 400-strong English defenders, and the English were defeated with 180 casualties. On May 6, the French crossed the river to launch an attack at the English stronghold at Saint-Jean-le-Blanc, southeast of the city. The English, sensing the French intent, withdrew the men at Saint-Jean-le-Blanc to the triple defensive complex at Tourelles Boulevard Augustins. The French then launched an attack on Saint-Augustin and took it before nightfall. Joan was wounded when she stepped on a metal spike and had to be taken back to the city. The next morning, Despite the commanders asking Joan to sit out the assault, Joan limped back to the battlefield with her wounded foot. Just after she arrived, she got struck by an arrow to her neck. She was taken away again, and rumors of her death spread around, which demoralized the French. The French attacks against the boulevard ended in failure. The French commanders decided to end the assault. As if driven by some divine will, Joan appeared in the French camp again that night. Despite having been wounded twice in 24 hours, her reappearance re-energized the French soldiers, and the French made one final assault on the boulevard and succeeded. The English retreated to their final fortification at Les Tourelles. French soldiers at the city, seeing the successes of the attack, repaired the bridge connecting Les Tourelles and the city. Suddenly, the English found themselves being attacked on both sides. They stood no chance. The English forces at Saint-Privé, seeing the success of the French attack, joined their comrades across the river. On May 8th, the English commanders, seeing no point in continuing the siege, retreated. The siege of Orleans, which lasted for over 6 months before the arrival of Joan of Arc, was lifted in just 9 days after her arrival. In a time when people were incredibly religious, it's no wonder people believed Joan of Arc was truly sent by God. And Joan, a 17-year-old peasant girl, in just 9 days had made herself a legend that would be remembered for hundreds, if not thousands of years to come. After the victory at Orleans, Joan went to meet the Dauphin again and urged him to go to Reims to crown himself king immediately. But the wiser military commanders knew that several English strongholds had to be taken first before they can march on Reims. Thus began the Loire campaign, which can basically be summarized as the French, under the spiritual leadership of Joan of Arc, completely owning the English on multiple occasions, culminating in the Battle of Patay. On June 18th, an English relief army of 5,000 men, which was supposed to relieve the English forces around the Loire River, found itself facing a French army less than 3 times its size. Before the English could properly set up defensive positions for its lumbermen, 180 mounted French knights sped ahead and charged the English army. Today was not going to be another Agincourt. In fact, quite the opposite. The English men-at-arms and lumbermen were no match for the heavily armored French knights in close quarters combat. This small contingent of French knights cut through the English army like hot knife through butter. When the rest of the French army arrived, the battle turned into a slaughter. The Loire campaign had momentarily neutered English power in France. The Dauphin, however, was still hesitant about marching deep into Burgundian territory and wanted to crown himself in Orleans instead. But Joan and some of his other advisors managed to persuade him to go to Reims instead, as a coronation in Reims would have a much greater political impact. On June 24th, the Dauphin, with Joan of Arc and tens of thousands of French soldiers, began the march to Reims. The city of Troyes was taken after 5 days of siege on July 9th. A week later, the French reached the city of Reims. The Burgundians holding the city opened the gates, and after 7 long years, the Dauphin finally crowned himself king in the Reims Cathedral on July 17th, with Joan taking a place of honor at the ceremony. The Dauphin was the Dauphin no more, and is now Charles VII, King of France. Joan's campaigns after the coronation went relatively poorly. It seems like luck was no longer on Joan's side. The siege of Paris in September 1429 ended in failure. The siege of La Charité also had to be abandoned due to bad weather. Nevertheless, when Joan returned to Charles's court around Christmas, she and her family were ennobled by Charles. Then, in March 1430, Joan would go on her last campaign. The French city of Compiègne was currently under siege, and Joan set out with a company of volunteers. Joan arrived at the city with 400 soldiers on May 14th. On May 23rd, during the retreat from an attack on the Burgundian camp, Joan and the rearguard were left stranded outside the city when the gates were shut before they could enter. With no alternatives, Joan surrendered to the Burgundians. The Burgundians sold her to the English for 10 kgp, and the English moved her to Rouen, where they put her on trial for heresy. Even though it was technically a religious trial, it was actually a political one. Even though she defended herself well during the trial, it wasn't going to help her case. The English wanted her dead. On May 30th, 1431, Joan was led to the old marketplace in Rouen. She was tied to a tall plastered pillar, whilst holding a cross given to her by a sympathetic English soldier. She got burned to a crisp. This is the story of how the English discovered French barbecue.